mulch. That's my pesticide right there. Man, we got some nice peppers this year.
I'm an investigative reporter with Telemundo 51 and NBC 6 South Florida. For more than a decade, I've helped the Hispanic community get their money back, but now I have the chance to help them recover something even more valuable: their health. It's why I've decided to tell my story.
Nos dijo que tenía licencia, algo que el departamento asegura no es cierto. Luego nos pidió que nos fuéramos.
So are you planning to pay Alexander Hernandez?
Yes, of course, yeah.
But it's been months since the hearing officer told you you have to pay him.
I have one of the most stressful jobs on TV. Maybe that contributed to what ended up happening to me. In 2017, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder called Sjogren's after spending more than 2 years with terrible joint pain, constant swollen glands, and this terrible fatigue that felt debilitating. I was 42 years old, and the doctor that took so long figuring out what was wrong with me had been telling me it was part of getting old. He was more than 60, but he was calling me old. I was referred to a rheumatologist who immediately put me on steroids to control my flares and autoimmune suppressors. You see, they had to deactivate my immune system because instead of protecting me from diseases like it's supposed to do, mine was attacking me. I felt better for a while, thanks to the steroids, but the side effects of those meds didn't take long to show up. My stomach got distended. I looked like a bloated frog. Everything I ate made me sick. One time I broke out in hives. Oh, and like the warning label said, I started to lose my hair. I also gained lots of weight, and because I'm on TV, everyone noticed. I remember once I asked my rheumatologist if there's anything I can change in my diet that could help me, and she flat out said no. Discouraged and weak, I spent most days laying on the sofa reading about Sjogren's. I discovered famous tennis star Venus Williams had it and was controlling it with a plant-based diet. That's when I remembered about a story I heard when I was a kid about my dad being told he was going to die and overcoming it with a plant-based diet. He was supposed to be dead, but there he was, strolling past his 80s.
Tenía 28 años, 8 años casado ya, y me vino un dolor que era imposible aguantar. Terrible, un dolor que me encogía y no podían descubrir qué. Entonces me internaron en la clínica, me tenían que poner calmantes en las piernas que no me podía mover, me clavaban los calmantes en las piernas para poder aguantar el dolor y no podían descubrir qué era. Entonces los médicos quisieron hacer una operación exploratoria. Y mi señora, que tenía 23 años en ese entonces, se opuso, habló con el médico de cabecera, que era como familia, y entre los dos se pusieron a operación exploratoria, porque dijo, si no saben de qué la van a operar, que no lo operen.
He says doctors thought he might have pancreatic necrosis, but they weren't sure. My grandma, his mom, wanted to send him to a naturopathic retreat to see if they could help him there. That treatment included a whole food plant-based diet and other natural remedies to bring down his fever.
Hablaron con el doctor del naturismo y dijeron, no, está desahuciado, no lo voy a recibir para que se venga a morir aquí. Entonces empezaron a hacer en la clínica el tratamiento naturista.
That treatment included a whole food plant-based diet and other natural remedies to bring down his fever.
Empezaron a hacerme la cataplasma, las frotaciones, la comida de fruta y verdura. Y cuando ya empezó a bajarme la fiebre, lograron que en el hogar me recibieran. Me recibieron en el hogar de Vida Natural y estuve un mes ahí. Pero empecé a sentirme cada día mejor. Cuando ya en un mes salí, pero como nuevo.
¿Qué le daban de comer, papi?
Los primeros días fue pura fruta. Después vinieron verdura cruda. Y después ya venían fruta y verduras cocidas.
Since then, my dad has used naturopathic treatments as medicine.
Cada vez que me siento mal, me pongo naturista.
But he admits his love for Chilean barbecues and Arab food have taken a toll on him throughout the years. He now lives with type 2 diabetes, and 10 years ago, he had to undergo double bypass surgery.
Pero me recuperé con naturismo. Me recuperé después del bypass. Incluso antes de las operaciones, yo me ponía el naturismo para estar en mejores condiciones para la operación.
He says that although he knows the benefits of a plant-based diet, he doesn't see it as a lifestyle.
La verdad que es muy difícil tenerlo como sistema de vida. pero como sistema de salud es indispensable.
That made me think, do these natural remedies really work, or was my dad going to get better anyways? I know most of the Latin American countries we come from have these natural wellness retreats, but are they really health centers or just spas? I wanted to see if plant-based nutrition could really be used to heal someone, and as an investigative reporter, I took a deep dive into the literature. I found a mountain of studies where doctors concluded that with this diet, you could prevent, slow down, or even reverse some of the chronic diseases that affect so many Americans, like heart disease, the leading cause of death in the United States. According to the Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, it claims 659,000 lives and cost us $363 billion each year. Diseases such as type 2 diabetes. According to the CDC, 34.2 million Americans have diabetes, and at the rate we're going, more than 100 million will have it by 2050. That's when I decided to travel, board a plane in the middle of a pandemic because I really needed to know more. I wanted to meet these doctors who claim to be curing patients with a plant-based diet. I traveled from Florida to the tri-state area, and in a community garden in Pennsylvania, I met Dr. Ana Negron.
And I never learned in medical school that plants were important.
Dr. Negron is a family medicine doctor whose focus changed over 40 years ago when she stopped eating animal products for ethical reasons and then discovered
there's a mountain of evidence that the more of whole foods, plant-based, we eat without processing through the industry, the more health we have.
She spent decades prescribing a whole food plant-based diet to her patients as a way to fight chronic diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, heart problems, and autoimmune disorders.
We are really in deep trouble in terms of health and nutrition in this country.
She says not only can we survive without consuming meat, chicken, eggs, milk, and cheese, but these are really not great sources of protein, she says, adding that protein originally comes from plants.
People will ask you, well, then how do I get my protein?
Well, just cut the middleman, cut the middle animal. Just eat it straight from the plants. If you eat enough calories to not lose weight unintentionally, you're getting enough protein. Calorie per calorie, broccoli and meat have the same amount of protein.
She explains that the animals we eat have produced protein by consuming plants, just like we do when we eat fruits, vegetables, beans, and grains. But unlike animal products that only give us protein, plants give us vitamins, phytochemicals, antioxidants, and fiber, among other nutrients.
No animal has fiber. No meat has fiber.
She says both animal protein and plant protein contain essential amino acids, but with the animal protein, you also get saturated fat and cholesterol, which contribute to heart disease, as well as the hormones those animals produce that promote cell growth, including in cancer cells.
So the animal protein is, yes, more efficient, but it's also a liability, something that we really never got into any trouble when we eat plant protein.
What about chicken and fish, some say? I mean, they've told us that those are lean meats and, they don't contribute too much to cholesterol. People who are thinking, heart healthy meats. I mean, those are terms that we've grown up listening to. This is heart healthy.
Yes, and who do we hear it from? The industry. Because they say, eat more chicken, eat less cow, eat more chicken. This is not from science. The cholesterol in chicken is similar to the cholesterol in beef.
And it's important to understand that the human body is made to be nourished by whole unprocessed plants instead of what we do consume in the standard American and Western diet.
Evelise Capó is a doctor of pharmacy and the executive director of Spanish programs and culinary content for the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. In his book, The China Study, Dr. Campbell talks about a 20-year project where he and two colleagues from China analyzed mortality rates from cancer and other chronic diseases in 65 counties in China. Using dietary surveys and blood tests taken from thousands of people, he concluded that those who ate a largely whole food, plant-based diet, avoiding animal products and processed and refined foods, could prevent, reduce, or reverse the development of several diseases.
The China project, it's unparalleled and unique in its comprehensiveness. the quality of the data, and even to this day, it has been the foundation to so many other studies and research.
In another study, Dr. Campbell and his team of investigators exposed a group of rats to a carcinogen and then divided them into groups, giving them between 5% and 20% casein, the protein found in dairy products. They noted that the rats given 20% casein grew tumors, while those given 5% had very little cancer cell growth. At 100 weeks, the rats given 20% casein were dead, and those given 5% were healthy. What may be more surprising is that when they alternated the dose of animal protein from 20% to 5%, the tumors shrank.
So cancer, it starts with a genetic mutation, and when exposed to certain substances, it can actually progress.
But we're talking about the protein found in milk, cheese, foods that we've been told strengthen our bones.
Fortunately, we don't need to worry about protein or calcium or other micronutrients. As long as we are consuming enough calories, enough food, we are getting enough protein.
A quick search of the USDA's database and I found 100 grams of kale have more calcium than 100 grams of whole milk. As for vitamin D, turns out our bodies make it when we get sunlight, while it has to be added to cow's milk. And if we are worried about osteoporosis, several studies concluded countries with the highest milk consumption actually have a higher rate of osteoporosis. But what about heart disease, the leading cause of death in this country? Doctors Dean Ornish and Caldwell Esselstyn have published several studies claiming patients with severe heart disease who switch to a whole food, plant-based diet without refined foods and processed oils can halt and even reverse their conditions.
So we saw that these patients following this lifestyle, they were getting better. They were reversing their heart disease, and they could actually track these numbers, and they did all the testing, and it was life-changing.
She says she's seen heart disease patients reduce and even eliminate their medication after a few weeks on this diet. And talking about prescription medication, I learned 45.8% of Americans take at least one pill a day. 24% take at least 3. The most commonly prescribed drugs include cholesterol-lowering medications, beta blockers for hypertension, and diabetes medications. All drugs meant to address symptoms, not the cause of the disease.
I would say a couple of years into the disease, I was taking about 12 medications. I had a pill box that I would travel with.
Dr. Sarai Stancic says she gained firsthand knowledge of the prescription drug issue when she became a patient in 1995.
Third-year medical resident, and I was on call, working an overnight shift. And it was a really busy night, running from emergency room to the ICU, back to the general ward, and I found myself around mid-morning hours, 3 o'clock in the morning. I had a little bit of time to go take a nap. And I made my way back to the call room, and I was feeling so tired, something I had never experienced before. The minute my head hit that pillow, I was out. And then about 30 minutes later, I was paged by the nurse, and when I tried to get up to answer the call, I couldn't feel my legs. Next thing I know, I'm in the emergency room. They're ordering an MRI, and off I go into this MRI machine.
She says she spent 2 hours in the MRI machine, and when she came out,
I hear the radiologist who is excited. He talking to the interns, he's like, go get the medical students, go get the residents, because it was like, whatever, bring them, because they have to see these images. This is classic multiple sclerosis. Look at this lesion, look at that lesion. And I'm hearing all of this, and that's how I learned that I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And it felt like the floor had fallen out from under me, and I felt like somebody had kicked me in the stomach, and I felt like it was the end.
multiple sclerosis, or MS, is an autoimmune disease that affects the brain and central nervous system. It occurs when the immune system attacks you instead of protecting you, damaging the protective covering of neurons. The cause is unknown, there is no cure, and many patients end up losing mobility.
Doctor comes in, the MS specialist, into the hospital room, and he says to me, I've looked at your images. You have multiple sclerosis. You have multiple lesions in both your brain and spinal cord. There's a very good possibility that within 10 to 20 years, you're going to be disabled and dependent on a wheelchair. I don't even know what to say. And he says to me, the good news is that you're lucky in one way because the FDA has just approved the first treatment to slow the progression of MS. And you need to start that like right now. He said it was a drug that has a significant side effect profile that includes fever, chills, muscle aches and pains, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, injection site reactions, depression, and suicidal thoughts, to name just a few.
She was 28 years old and admits that while she trusted the medical protocol, the side effects started testing her resolve.
And after doing this for a couple of weeks, I just didn't think I could do it much longer. And I called him, I said, I can't do this anymore. And then he said, no. And he reminded me of the wheelchair. And he said, listen, you have to stay on this medication, but I know what we need to do. What we need to do is treat the side effects of this drug with other drugs, of course. So when I couldn't sleep, I was given a prescription for Ambien to help me sleep. And when I couldn't wake up, I was given a prescription for a drug called Provigil, which is like an amphetamine. And then when I became depressed, I was given a prescription for Prozac. So you can see how over a very short period of time, these medications and prescriptions started to add it up. And despite being compliant with everything they're telling me to do, I continued to have exacerbations regularly, and my disease progressed. And I found myself wearing a diaper at one point, and cane, crutches. I couldn't feel my legs. Sometimes I could feel them. Sometimes they were painful. It was just every day I would wake up and wonder what piece of me is missing today. At some point, I lost hope that things could get better.
But that changed in 2003 when she says she came across a medical journal that had an article about blueberries and MS patients.
So drop everything, pick up the journal, turn to the article, and of course I find a poorly constructed, unscientific study that essentially took a small group of MS patients and fed them a diet enriched in blueberries, and the authors go on to conclude that these patients felt better. It's not a very objective clinical endpoint. I mean, I was a researcher and a scientist. I couldn't believe that somebody had done such a study and that it was published. It was silly to me.
She admits while she and her colleagues laughed at the article, there was one question that stuck with her.
Could there be a connection between diet and disease? If anybody could answer that question, of course, I should be able to. I was a doctor, right? And I 4 years of medical school, 4 years of internal medicine residency, and then another 2 years as a subspecialist. And I couldn't think of any examples in which any of my professors, mentors, or educators ever connected those two dots between diet and disease.
She says when she started researching, she found plenty of evidence showing a connection, including the work of neurologist Dr. Roy Swank, who studied MS patients for more than 30 years in Norway, where the prevalence and incidence of the disease have frequently been reported. He first noted that there were more MS cases in the mountains where meat, dairy, and eggs were consumed regularly than in the coastal fishing communities.
And he hypothesized in the 1950s that somehow saturated fat was playing a role the pathogenesis of multiple sclerosis. But he didn't just hypothesize, he actually started to treat patients with a low-fat plant-based diet. And he followed a large cohort, 140 plus patients over 34 years. And he concluded in a publication in 1990 in The Lancet that those who adhered to his diet, 95% of them remained physically active. So 95% of them were free of disability.
This is where you walk every day.
Every day, yeah.
But she says when she went to her doctor with the information she found, she didn't get the reaction she expected.
And he said, you should know better. You're a doctor. I know it's not what you want to hear, but the truth is that you need to remain compliant with your medicines. And if you want to blame anything for having MS, it's because of your genes, and there's nothing you can do about that.
Disheartened, she said she turned to the research again. If genes really were to blame, then surely someone had studied the likelihood identical twins would both be diagnosed with the same disease.
And if my doctor was right, if twin A has MS, then it's going to be close to 100% that twin B would also have MS. So again, I turned to the scientific literature looking to see what if anybody had answered that question. Of course, someone had, and it wasn't 100%. It wasn't even 50%. It was 14 to 33%.
She then took a deep dive into epigenetics.
Epigenetics essentially tells us that gene expression is dependent on outside variables. That just because you have a genetic predisposition to a particular disorder doesn't necessarily mean that you will have that disease. And what does epigenetics tell us is important? What are the factors that play such an important role on influence the expression? It's things like diet and exercise and sleep and stress. It's lifestyle.
That's when she says she decided to change her lifestyle.
I adopted a whole food plant-based diet, one rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, because the overwhelming evidence in the scientific literature spoke to that was the ideal diet for human health.
She also made other lifestyle changes like learning how to sleep without meds, lowering her stress level, and exercising, something that was not recommended for MS patients at the time.
I was going to put myself first for the first time in my life. And it didn't happen in a week and it didn't happen in a month, but over time, I started to feel better.
Years later, in 2010, her health had improved so much, she was able to run a marathon.
Today, it's going to be 26 years since my diagnosis, and I am medication-free and disability-free and empowered more than ever before to share this healing message with whomever is willing to listen, because this isn't complicated. Anybody can do this.
She attributes her good health to the changes she's made, like switching to a diet rich in plants and free of animal protein, processed and refined foods, very different from the standard American diet filled with saturated fat, mostly derived from animal products, as well as processed and artificially sweetened foods. And that's not even counting our junk or fast food problem.
America's obesity epidemic is apparently getting worse.
And more than double that number, 88 million, have what's called pre-diabetes.
According to the CDC, more than 42% of Americans are obese, and one of the diseases associated with obesity is type 2 diabetes. Studies show Americans consume an average of 152 pounds of added sugar each year, which is included in products such as the sodas we drink and our breakfast cereals.
So diabetes is one of the conditions that reacts to a change in lifestyle quite rapidly. And it's not an issue of sugar, which a lot of people think, you know, I'm just eating too much sugar and so I have diabetes. But it's actually an issue of fat. Eating a diet high in fatty foods can cause an accumulation of fat inside our cells and interfere with the ability of the insulin to move the sugar out of the bloodstream and into the cells. So instead of powering our cells, it's actually building up sugar outside of our cells, causing diabetes.
She's referring to the fat we accumulate in our bloodstream when we are overweight or consume an excess of high fatty foods such as butter that has 45.6 grams of saturated fat per 100 grams. But if we're not eating animal protein, then what should diabetics be putting on their plate?
We've been told in the last decade maybe that carbs are bad for you.
So we lump all carbs or carbohydrates into one big bucket, and that's very unfortunate, because you can't compare, you know, simple sugars with complex carbohydrates, which are whole grains and fruits and legumes.
As for heart disease, Dr. Ken Williams, the past president of the American College of Cardiology, has actually promoted a plant-based diet, citing studies like the one Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn conducted with 24 patients between the ages of 44 and 68 who had severe coronary artery disease, had unsuccessfully undergone bypass or angioplasties, or were deemed too sick to undergo surgeries. 5 of them were told they would die within the year.
His patients were ones that were sent home by their physicians because they've already been through bypass surgery and medications, and you know, their medical providers thought there's nothing else we can do.
In that study, the doctor kept patients on their cholesterol-lowering medications and took away meat, poultry, fish, dairy products, eggs, oil, added sugar, and processed foods, leaving them on a whole plant-based diet. The group started with an average cholesterol level of 246. Of the 24, 17 followed the diet for 12 years and ended up with an average level below 150, without one more cardiac event or the need to undergo another surgery, such as heart bypass, that is done more than 200,000 times a year in the United States at a cost of $6.7 billion. According to Dr. Negron, the problem with relying exclusively on these surgeries is that they only correct one obstruction at a time, tube, but we have thousands of miles of blood vessels in our body, and the only way to try to address our entire cardiovascular system is by feeding it better, including foods such as leafy greens into our diet that produce nitric oxide.
So we know that by eating plant-based foods, we are reducing the amount of animal protein, the amount of fats as well, and if we're eating foods that are high in nitrates, for instance, that converts to nitric oxide in our body, which helps in our cells for our arteries to be able to dilate when needed, and so they're more flexible, and we have a healthier cardiovascular system.
But a plant-based diet doesn't just mean eating salads.
You can eat rice and beans and oats and quinoa and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and pumpkin and papaya and sweet potatoes and nuts and avocado. From the animal kingdom, all you get is meat, dairy, and eggs. From the plant world, we would be here sitting until we are 90 years old, and we wouldn't exhaust the list.
That's a message that's resonating in our community. Driven not only by the desire to be healthy, but also concern for the planet, the vegan movement is picking up steam. From family festivals where everyone gets to try popular dishes made with plants instead of animals, to food and wine festivals where well-known chefs and nutrition experts demonstrate that eating plants can be tasty. But be careful. Swapping meat for mushrooms in a recipe is one thing, and eating a veganized version of junk food is likely not the way to go.
The key is to look for nutritious and high foods that are dense in nutrition instead of dense in calories and so forth.
As I read the studies and interviewed doctors, I began to understand the healing, anti-inflammatory, and regenerative power of plants. But what if what people are looking for is to get strong, build muscle?
A lot of players, like top players, they doing plant-based. Why? All of them say is because the recovery is faster.
Cesar Berrios, known on social media as Soy el Vegano, is a personal trainer who used to eat what many athletes consider is a clean diet to build muscle, filled with lean meats and veggies.
I only eat like a chicken breast and sometimes meat and a lot of milk protein. And I say I was living in like a healthy lifestyle.
But that changed in 2014.
8 years ago, I have the diagnosis with arthritis. I had a lot of inflammation in my body. I wasn't able to move my joints. I wasn't able to exercise. My life was so sad.
Cesar was diagnosed with spondyloarthritis, a type of arthritis that attacks the spine and in some people their arm and leg joints.
Now, you went to your doctor, and what did they tell you?
He told me you have a autoimmune disease, and the treatment for this disease is anti-inflammatory and immunosuppressors. And you have to take this medicine for your whole life.
He says the meds helped with the inflammation, but the side effects were difficult to live with.
Yeah, I have a lot of side effects, my skin, my hair. So yeah, my side effect was in one point was worse than the disease. I was in depression because I said I'm super healthy, I'll go to the gym every day. So to be honest with you, it's the first time I say this. I think to kill myself in one moment because I say I don't want to live my whole life with pain and inflammation, because what's really sad, I remember I was walking like an old guy.
In his darkest hour, he says he started searching for another way to heal and found doctors prescribing green juices to bring down inflammation, and one physician in Venezuela went even further.
And he said you should eliminate food what create inflammation in your body, milk, meat, chicken, fish, and you're gonna see how your body change.
Though he thought it a crazy idea, he decided to give it a shot and began juicing in the morning.
The first day was horrible. I remember I just close my nose and drink the juice. But I say if I take the medicine, it's give me a lot of side effects. I can try this, and that really helped me. I tried the juice and I say, okay, this is working. And I say, I don't really like meat. And yeah, I eat chicken because the protein, and I eat eggs because the protein. And I say, okay, I can't stop this because I don't want to be like with muscle, but not able to walk or move.
After removing all the animal protein and adding plant foods to his diet, he says his inflammation disappeared, and 6 months later he was strong and began to study the relation between nutrition and disease.
So 8 years later, now you don't take any pills?
At all, just like nutrition, lifestyle, and yeah, no pills at all.
Cesar now promotes a plant-based diet not only as a way to heal, but as part of his physical training, dispelling the belief that you need animal protein to build muscle.
And you've been able to build muscle on a plant-based diet?
I think so. Yeah, you're completely able to build muscle. It's about amino acid. You have to eat a lot of antioxidant food because that's gonna help you to recover faster. And when you work out one day and the next day, if you wanna work out again, you have to be able to do it.
As for that exorbitant amount of animal protein he used to consume, like many athletes still do, he says he learned that wasn't necessary. According to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, eating protein doesn't equal big muscles. Instead, muscle growth is a complex process that relies on adequate consumption of protein and calories, hormones the body produces, including human growth hormones and testosterone, and a healthy dose of physical activity.
How do you build muscle without animal protein?
Because it's not just one nutrient. It's a lot of it's the combination of workout, nutrients, and I take protein. Plants have protein, legumes have protein, soy have protein. So you don't really need to build muscle with eating tons of protein. The first thing what you need to know is how many grams per protein you need.
According to the Academy of Nutrition, protein from food does help repair the damage from exercise, but Evelise says we don't need as much protein as we think, and it doesn't have to come from animal foods.
Standard American diet or Western diet has 4 to 5 times more protein than we actually need. We only need to consume about 8 to 10% of our calories from protein. So as long as we're eating enough, we should get enough.
They recommend you consume 0.35 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So a person who weighs 165 pounds should consume about 60 grams of protein a day. But the average American consumes almost double that amount, which some doctors say can negatively affect the organs that have to process it.
Yes, we need animal protein. And guess what? We make it ourselves because we are animals. And we make animal protein from the plant protein that we eat.
And if you're a professional athlete and need to replenish more protein, we found some plant sources have more than animals do. According to the Department of Agriculture's database, 100 grams of black beans contain 24.4 grams of protein along with fiber and minerals, while a 100-gram porterhouse steak has 22.7 grams of protein, no fiber, but a fair share of cholesterol.
Where do you get your protein?
I eat a lot of legumes. I eat hemp seed, which I love because with 2 tablespoons, you can get 10 grams of protein. I eat a lot of kale, spinach, I eat mushrooms. I try to eat more vegetables, anti-inflammatory food, antioxidant.
He says eating this way allows him to train more often.
When you recover faster, you can train more.
Yeah, I train twice a day.
Cesar says under his doctor's supervision, he stopped taking medications and only consumes B12, a vitamin not found in plant foods.
Everybody, that's following this lifestyle should have a good source of vitamin B12. You should get your levels tested as well. And it's not a problem only of people that are whole food plant-based. For people that eat meat, obviously, they're consuming the vitamin B12 produced by the bacteria of the animals that they're eating. And when we were living out in nature and drinking water, from the lake and being exposed to the bacteria out, we were getting our vitamin B12. But we live in a society that's clean, and so, we're not getting enough. So we should really emphasize on that.
Dr. Negron says she's not opposed to medication. That, she says, would be irresponsible. She's a traditional doctor that prescribes medicine as a temporary vehicle to help correct a problem, but not as a permanent solution, which is why she helps patients learn to change their eating habits.
To know that 80% of our diseases are man-made, to know that 80% of our diseases are associated with our food and lifestyle, and to really not be just clamoring for how do we get rid of that and get on the health path.
Why don't doctors tell you this?
Because we don't learn it in medical school.
When I was in medical school, I did not learn this. Physicians who are in practice now for 10, 20, 30 years did not get this in medical school. And the young physicians are getting very little, if they get any at all.
We know that a lot of patients, for instance, they follow whatever their physician tells them. And if their physician is not well informed in nutrition, then they're obviously not gonna have the information that they need to prevent or reverse their disease.
But that is changing. Hundreds of professionals in the health industry, doctors, nurses, as well as personal trainers like Cesar Berrios, and anyone looking to learn more are taking plant-based nutrition courses like the certificate E. Cornell offers through T. Colin Campbell's Center for Nutrition Studies.
Our certificate is an evidence-based program that explains the science behind nutrition and the development of health and chronic diseases. It also talks about important topics such as protein, macronutrients, exercise, and it connects the dots between diet and the environment sustainability. It empowers communities to take action and individuals to utilize these skills in their everyday living and their profession.
After learning the science behind this lifestyle, I decided to see if it could work for me. Without my doctor's consent, I had stopped taking the immunosuppressants and steroids because of the side effects they gave me, something I now know I shouldn't have done. So I had flares all the time. I had nothing to lose, so I went for it. I stopped consuming animal protein, and 2 weeks later, a routine blood test confirmed my triglycerides had dropped from 239 to 138, something I never thought possible because I was told it was hereditary. 5 months later, my new rheumatologist ordered blood tests which indicated that the inflammation in my body had dropped to normal levels for the first time in years, and the blood that had been appearing in my urine samples for 6 years had disappeared. My joint pains were gone, and instead of debilitating fatigue, I had energy again, and I started losing weight.
Animal protein, animal foods do promote inflammation. We have definitely seen a link between animal-based foods and these conditions. So when you remove these products from your diet and you introduce the healing power of a whole food plant-based nutrition, you get results like yours.
Seeing that it was working, I added other components of lifestyle medicine. I learned to manage stress using tools like meditation that I do daily and sometimes with my family. I started doing moderate exercise at least 5 times a week and learned to sleep again since I didn't have aches and pains waking me up at night.
So it's been a year since I started this journey. Last year, I had a wellness check 2 weeks after I stopped eating animal protein, animal products, and my triglycerides had gone down. So this year, my new wellness check has come, and I want to see what my numbers look like.
That test showed my cholesterol levels had plummeted into the normal range for the first time in years. I'm truly in awe of how far I've come in just a year. Under the supervision of my new rheumatologist who knows more about nutrition, I haven't had another flare and no longer take medication. I've never smoked or consumed alcohol, which also contribute to chronic diseases, so I didn't have to worry about that. Without pills masking my symptoms, I can now tell when my body needs to rest and when a certain food doesn't sit right. I think I finally learned to listen to my body and give it food that nourishes it instead of causing inflammation. With this new lifestyle, I'm doing things that I was told I could never do again, like signing up for a half marathon with my husband. A couple of years ago, the inflammation in my joints was causing me so much pain that I could barely walk a few blocks, and now I'm running.
She gets her colonoscopy every year.
I couldn't help but think of Dr. Sarai Stancic, who was initially offended when someone suggested she run a marathon, but then found the strength.
I realized that I was living my life first and foremost as this woman with MS, this doctor with MS, this mother with MS. I was MS, the poster child. And with that label came so many limitations, things I could do and things I couldn't. And I realized I needed to drop that.
I thought of her as I ran the 13 miles, how she got up every morning and exercised to stay mobile, how she ate anti-inflammatory foods to prevent flares, and went to bed early to give her body the chance to regenerate.
You know, I was given this blessing to recover from my disease. So now it's my responsibility to assure that I share this message. We know that by implementing these very small, simple changes in our lives, we can prevent so much disease, so much pain and suffering. And my hope for each and every one of us is that we age gracefully, free of these chronic diseases.
I thought of my dad that says he got his life back this way 3 years before I was born.
Así que si no fuera por el hogar naturista.
No, nosotros no estábamos aquí. No eran salvados.
Always finding ways to share his wisdom with his sense of humor.
Que si quieres ser fuerte como un toro, no comas toro. Come lo que come el toro.
I also thought of Cesar Berrios, who refused to become a victim of his illness.
If you know how the nutrition affect your life and what you eat affect your future, you're gonna change. There's no way if you have the knowledge, you need to change.
And the advice he gave me.
If you make the change now, in the future, you're gonna be healthy. That's the main purpose of my life right now. Telling people you don't have to be sick to change your diet.
With those words of encouragement and the support of my family and friends, I made it to the finish line. And not just of the half marathon. I got my life back, and now I know that even if I am genetically predisposed to certain diseases, I have a better chance of living a long, healthy life if I continue healing through food.